national airport is needed in Nepal, and if it is needed, then to analyze, to study the different alternatives for the site, and finally to ensure transparency in the decision-making process. So we have with us Carol Inskipp, and she completed her master's in ecology from Durhan University in UK, and she visited Nepal for the first time in 1977, and in 1985 she co-authored a book, Guide to Birds of Nepal, with her husband Tim. And since then, she has done wide research on bird ecology in Nepal, and she's also the lead author of a 5-volume series called the National Red List, which specifies the endangered bird species in Nepal. So, Carol, would you like to start with your presentation?
Yes, yes, certainly. First of all, thank you very much, Salonika, Pramisha, Shreya, and all the team for inviting me. And I'm very pleased to have this opportunity to talk about Nijhgad. I'll just share my screen now to start the PowerPoint. And just wait a moment. Oh, here we go. Right. Can you see that, Salonika? Is that okay?
Yes.
Oh, okay, good, right. Right, so I'll just control this myself. Well, there hasn't actually been a study to find out, to find out which birds and which mammals and what other wildlife occurs at Nijhgad. But as it's a very similar habitat to Pasa National Park, which is adjacent, and then we can safely assume that the species are likely to be very similar. Number of species and the actual the actual species themselves. So there's a very large number actually of species in Pasa National Park, even more in Chitwan, but about the same order of magnitude. And I've spoken to a number of my birding friends and colleagues, and they agree with me that that equates to over 1 million individual birds. And as well as birds, of course, there's numerous other species of wildlife, mammals, reptiles, amphibians, and of course invertebrates, huge number, far more species of other fauna than birds. Now then, so if they actually, can you see all the screen here? Is it covered by?
No, I guess we can see all the screen. Yeah.
You can see all the screen. Okay, that's great. Right. Well, whoops, I've gone. So, one argument I've heard about saying that by siting the airport at Nijhgad, which is adjacent to Pasa, no problem, because although I believe it's estimated over 2.4 million trees of native trees will be chopped down, not to worry, because the birds and other wildlife will simply move into Pasa. But actually that will not happen, because for any ecologists among you will know that for any healthy ecosystem, all the spaces are taken. There's just simply not the room for even half or a quarter or hardly any of those individuals to move into Pasa. It's a bit like saying, in the Kathmandu Valley, city of Kathmandu, and so there's a major disaster in some part of the country, and then huge numbers of people come into Kathmandu. Well, there's no room for them. There's no land, they've lost their land in the mountains, there's no land for them in Kathmandu. There's not even we've seen this happen, haven't we, with the earthquake? These poor people have come in, have been reduced to camping by the river in terrible conditions. And Yeah, so it's the same in the animal world. So almost all of these birds and other wildlife species as well will have just nowhere else to go. And if that if that many trees, that many on that site, then they will just die. And I am certain of that. Well then, okay, suppose they do, you know, why does the loss, I've been asked to talk about birds, so I'll just focus on birds here. Why does the loss of the birds matter anyway? Uh, you know, in taking account, you know, development, the economy and so on. Well, let me just say there are a number of reasons why. First of all, I mean, one of the moral, religious and cultural reasons, one of the main reasons one of the reasons I like Nepal and Nepalis as much as I do is that the Nepali culture encourages a respect for wildlife. And all living things, of course, deserve respect. And as a result, you know, we have and human beings, as you know, have the capacity and the ability to you know, the lives of wildlife are in our hands, actually. Our actions determine their future. So if we, and that brings a special responsibility to us as well, to look after them. And there are many folk stories, you know, better than me, about birds in the Nepal religious religions and culture. I mean, the Indian peafowl, which occurs in Nijhgad, is one of these. It's let me get this right, because yeah. So it's regarded as the carrier of the god of the god Kumar, or Kartikeya as you call it. So that's, and also economic reasons. Although some birds, they, you know, are pest to crops, there's no doubt that a huge that is far outweighed by the benefits that they provide by eating harmful insect pests. They consume an enormous number, like this lesser adjutant stork. That's another bird which must occur in Nijhgad. It occurs all along the lowland. This is a globally threatened species, actually. Great big stork, huge bird. And birds are highly important pollinators and dispersers of seeds, like this really pretty crimson sunbird. That's a fairly common bird in the lowland too. In fact, there are a number of plants that are unable to the only way they are fertilized are if birds pollinate them. Certain species of birds pollinate them. So pollinators and dispersers are highly important. And scavengers, just to remind you, I'm sure you're aware, Nepal's got several species of vultures, and they have a very important role in the ecosystem with scavenging and breaking down waste, consuming waste. And another is they are very, very good monitors of environmental health. Now, this is partly because birds are in all habitats, almost virtually all habitats around the world. They are fairly conspicuous compared to other groups, you know, other groups of wildlife, and they're also fairly easier to identify. So if we keep an eye, bird populations can really indicate to us what, if anything's seriously wrong, and that became very evident in Europe in the 1960s. When this peregrine falcon again occurs in Nepal. It also occurs in Europe, widespread across the world actually. Anyway, its numbers plummeted, went down really sharply in the UK, and people wondered why. And there was one scientist, it was their breeding success. Their eggs were broken, nests were investigated, and they found that the female had laid eggs, but they were broken in the nest. And when they examined the eggs, they found that the eggshells were really, really thin. And they determined this was because the birds had a high concentration of the pesticide DDT. Now, I'm sure many of you are familiar with this story, but I think it's a very good one that indicates, that illustrates to us how birds are good monitors of the environment. And last but not least, most of us enjoy birds. I mean, we enjoy listening to them and watching them. The Magpie Robin, it must be a familiar bird, to many of you. And it's really common in Kathmandu and other towns, and in rural areas as well. It's got a really pretty song, and it's a really perky bird, black and white, and quite confiding and tame. Now then, these forests are also very, very likely to have some globally threatened species. Some really charismatic birds that occurs in Pasa and Chitwan, and is very likely to be Nijhgad too, highly likely. One of them is this great Slatey woodpecker, which is as big as a crow actually, and it's the biggest woodpecker in the world, in fact. And it has a habit of, unlike other woodpeckers, of flying around in family parties together. So they're really quite something to see in the forest. Another one is this magnificent hornbill, the great hornbill, another globally threatened species. It eats figs, and it lives in all trees. So it is entirely dependent on large, mature trees. Another globally is this magnificent eagle. It's all these three birds, by the way, are resident, and this breeds in Nepal, and again in Chitwan and Pasa, so very, very likely in Nijhgad. The Asian Woollyneck, it's a lovely name because of its, you can see the feathers on its neck there. This is another globally threatened species occurring in the area. This is decreasing now very sadly. But as well as these globally threatened species that I think we have a special responsibility for, Nijhgad forests are important for many resident bird species as well, especially woodpeckers actually. This is a Himalayan goldenback found in the foothills of the Himalayas and the adjacent lowlands. And we mustn't forget that these tropical and subtropical forests in Nepal, they're important for some winter visitors that come from Northern Asia, and they come to the Indian subcontinent. Some move on to India, but a lot of them stay in Nepal. And also many bird species that breed in the Himalayas higher up, say in the temperate zone or the subalpine zone, they move down to Nepal's tropical and subtropical forests in winter. There's not the food for them higher up in the winter time. So these forests are very important for them too. Now, very early in my career, I actually worked on a team studying the potential bird site hazards to aircraft at a site that London was, there was regarded as an urgent need for a third airport in London. We had Heathrow, we had Gatwick, but we needed somewhere else. And there was one site they were that on Foulness, actually, in Essex. It's a long time ago. This is 1971, 72. And so I was part of, there were 5 of us, and we were investigating, you know, potential of bird hazards to aircraft. Actually, we discovered that, in fact, if they built the airport there, they would have attracted more birds than there were there at the present time. So anyway, so that was my experience a long time ago. Nijhgad's a very different experience, I have to say, to you know, to Foulness. They later they built the airport at Stansted, not at Foulness. Anyway, so Nijhgad. I mean, I've read the environmental impact assessment, and that makes the important point that food waste should be avoided around the airport. I mean, any of you have flown anywhere will appreciate there's a huge amount of food waste. You know, you get this free food and then you don't like it and, you know, throw it. So there is a lot of food waste that comes out of planes every day, and they've made the important point that it must be taken away from the aircraft site. Well, that's great. I'm pleased to hear that, because that would attract large numbers of birds. However, there will still be large numbers of high numbers of large birds of prey, like vultures and eagles, soaring over the airport site. That's inevitable. They'll be coming from Pasa and from Chitwan even as well. The way these large birds feed is they spread out, you know, they spread out over the sky and soar. And one can see the other. So we say one is Tom, and he can see Harry. And Harry can see Peter, and then so one of them sees something to feed on, and so Tom sees something to feed on. So Harry sees him go down, so Harry goes down. Peter sees Harry go down, and that's how you get so many vultures that appear at food, you know, at any one time. They seem to come from nowhere, but they're all watching each other spread out over the sky, and they spread out over a huge distance. So they're going to be doing that, and the heights these birds will fly at are within the altitudinal range with which planes are coming in to land and taking off. So these birds from these national parks nearby are going to be a high risk to incoming in aircraft. The birds themselves, actually many of those species are actually globally threatened. All the vultures except one occurring in Nepal, all the resident vultures are globally threatened or near threatened. Many of the eagles are as well. But another, you know, very serious and arguably more important point might be that bird strikes cause, if a bird is sucked into the engine or it hits, you know, the plane hits the bird, then that can bring a plane down, and so, you know, the plane would crash and people would be killed. So it is just not true to say that which again I've read that there are claims that Nijhgad would be a safer site than the present airport in Kathmandu Valley. That just isn't true. So about that, yeah. And I've also read that it's okay if we chop down all these trees, no problem, because the government, you know, will commit to planting new plantations. In fact, even planting twice as many is being cut down, so it would even be better. But the fact is, as far as wildlife are concerned, new plantations are no replacement for mature old growth forests that currently occur at Nijhgad. So why is that? Well, a natural forest, as you know, has got trees and bushes, shrubs of different species and different ages. So it's a very diverse habitat. Whereas new plantations, the trees are of the same age, and very often their trees are uh, shrubs aren't planted, and that's a very important component of the ecosystem for birds and other wildlife. The shrub layer, tree layer, shrub layer, and then the ground layer. And it would take some time for shrubs to colonize. And so and also within the old growth native forest, there's a wide range of conditions, such as sunlight, deep shade, and high humidity, low humidity. So all these different aspects of a natural forest means that the one habitat of forest provides huge number of what we call microhabitats for wildlife species. And there would be very few there are very few in the plantation. Just some examples of these habitats. There'd be an old growth forest, and a native forest has got clearings. These are caused by, over time, by some trees being felled, not being felled, sorry, some trees being blown down, say in a storm. And this creates a sunny clearing, and that's a really good place for flycatchers to hunt insects, like this lovely bird. It's a flycatcher. By the way, all the bird examples I'm using here are all birds that are almost 90%, 95, 99% certain they'll be occurring in Nijhgad. And old growth forest has also got lots of decaying logs and stumps, and you might think, what's the use of those? But they're full of invertebrates, beetles, and so on that are eaten by other wildlife, especially woodpeckers, actually, like this lovely lesser yellownape. And many birds and other species, they rely on mature trees because they develop holes over time, and these are used by birds for roosting and nesting, especially owls. This is a fairly common owl, the brown hawk owl, but many other owls too: Indian scops owl, brown wood owl, spotted owlet. There's about 8 or 9 or more, actually. Now then, the site for the new airport is adjacent. The proposed site is right next to Pasa National Park, and it doesn't take much imagination to realize that the new airport and the infrastructure like roads and buildings, it would create huge amount of the construction itself, but after its construction, planes coming in and out, all the road traffic, all the development which inevitably seems to take place along the roadsides. This will cause much disturbance, noise, and other disturbance to Pasa National Park. There's a very interesting study made a couple of years ago on globally threatened birds in Chitwan National Park, and they found that these birds all kept well away from the tracks. These aren't surfaced roads, but tracks through the national park. So there's no doubt that roads do create a lot of disturbance. And so that means that the wildlife will be forced further into the national park, and that strip of the national park adjacent to the airport will be less valuable because it's degraded. I know that Rethink Nijhgad are not focusing on climate change, but I can't help putting this slide in because it's something I feel passionately about. So that obviously, if 2.4 million trees are cut down, or whatever number, the huge number of trees are cut down, then all the capacity to store carbon is lost to the atmosphere, so increasing the risk of increasing risks of climate change. And I've heard that there are plans to plant twice as many new trees, but it's well known, scientifically proven, and not easy to and easy to understand, that because when trees are planted as saplings, small thin trees, they obviously have the capacity to store far less carbon than a big, mature trees. And there's these shrubs as well, woody shrubs as well. Let's not forget those. And it's been found that a tree does not store significant amount of carbon until it's at least 20 to 30 years old. And it'll take much longer. I mean, trees grow slowly. I mean, even fast-growing conifers, the same applies. They grow faster, but they still don't store a significant amount of carbon until they're 20 years old. So then, but for that tree that young tree to replace a single tree of a single old tree will take far longer. And climate change is happening now. We can't afford to wait 20 years. The impacts are affecting all of us now. And there's also some recent studies that have shown that the new, I've partly covered this really. I've explained the new studies have shown that new plantations contribute less to carbon storage. Well, that's mainly to do with the age of the trees. So my question is, what's happened to that slide? I wonder. Here we are. My question is, is there a better way? I know that there are 2 more new airports planned in Nepal. There's Bairoa and Pokhara, 2 more international airports. So surely there's there's an argument for a study to be conducted for a new international, to find out if Nepal really needs a new international airport. I haven't mentioned the impacts of COVID here because I realize that even if it goes ahead, where planned at the moment at Nijhgad, it wouldn't be ready till 2025. And the impacts of COVID, well, let's think they will likely be over by then. And, so Nepal's international, I mean, we just don't know what's going to happen, but the international tourist train, international travel we hope it's all back to where it was by then. So let's assume that a study's been carried out or not or whatever, but it's decided that a new airport is certainly needed, to supplement Kathmandu's current airport. Then I think there's a very good case to carry out a new environmental impact assessment on it at this site. I don't know so much about, just from an environmental point of view, just from a bird point of view, but other wildlife as well. And let's remember climate change. And does it need to be that big? I read with dismay that it was, if Nijhgad is built as planned, it'll be the biggest in South Asia and the 4th biggest in the world. I mean, is that just, and then there'll be a big, road needed to take everybody to Kathmandu, whatever. But does Nepal really, do you really need one that big? So that, I think that needs I think that needs to be studied. And also, so I agree wholeheartedly with Rethink Nijhgad on that. They're also advocating to look at new alternative sites. And I agree. Are there other sites with less of an environmental impact? I know a couple have been, suggested. There's even been suggested that, Kathmandu, the airport tribe of island Kathmandu, could be expanded, and some domestic flights move somewhere else. But anyway, these are alternatives, that I really don't know much about, and I know they haven't been studied. So I think it would be really beneficial for everyone, actually, for Nepal, for all Nepalis, if the alternatives were investigated and environmental impact assessments made on those as well. Well, I hope you don't mind me as an Englishwoman talking to you about what you should be doing in Nepal. I have visited Nepal about over 20 times now since 1977, so many friends there, and I love it. Love Nepalis, love the country, and so I only agreed today because I care about you all and about Nepal, so that's why I agreed to talk. Anyway, I'm happy to answer any questions, hope I can, that you might have. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you, Carol. So I have a few questions that we have that we received from the registration forms. If anyone in the audience wants to ask any question, please feel free to type in the chat box, and we can ask Carol that. So the first question we have is, what happens when there is a large avian population in an area where airport is being built?
Sorry, say that again.
What happens when there is such a large avian population in an area where airport is being built? Like you said that there are over 1 million, like an estimation of over 1 million birds in the area, right? So, and what it can mean for the future, like both of the airport and of the birds. I know you have like touched on this subject, but yeah, would you like to elaborate something on this?
I thought I had covered that. Really, I mean, obviously, when the airport during this construction, the birds will have to move out, and they will try to move to similar habitats. So as there'll be forest birds, they will move out to. They will try to move into Pasir National Park, but as I said, because Pasir is a healthy ecosystem, there just isn't going to be room for them. So they will suffer from competition, and they would just not survive, actually.
Thank you. And I have a question. And like there are different types of birds in different ecosystems, right? And the ones in like can you explain like why they cannot move from one ecosystem to another? And as far as I know, due to the climate change, the birds in Nepal are moving to a higher altitude, right?
Yeah, some of them are. Yeah.
So,
yes, well, I mean, the birds. Just a basic ecological fact, isn't it, that that birds and other wildlife, I mean, some species are what, they occur in many different kinds of habitats, okay? A small number of species are very adaptable. They can adapt. Crows are a good example, house crow, but I suppose jungle crow, the large-billed crow, that is, but though house crow is closely associated with people. There are a few that are adaptable, highly adaptable, and can, but most bird species will just be found, like a forest bird will be found in just in forest, and it may just be found. It's likely to be found in if it lives in tropical forest. Then it is very likely it can only survive in tropical forest. The Indian, or sometimes they extend up to the a bit higher as well. Also, the forest types important. Some forests are very humid, as you know, so there's some specialist, babblers that are only found in very damp, humid, dense forests, like the scimitar babblers. But there are also some species. Indian peafowl is a good example. It doesn't like a humid forest at all. It prefers a very dry forest, a drier forest like there is in Chitwan, Nilgad, Nijhgad, Pausa, Badia, Suklafanta. So they are just adapted. It's their food, places to roost, places to nest, and climate change. Yes, some a small number actually, but some birds have they responded to climate change. They are actually moving higher up. They're moving to no. One good example is the pale blue, a little pretty blue bird called the pale blue flycatcher, and it was found in the Kathmandu Valley, but summer visitor, but quite rare. But now it's fairly common in places like Nagajung. There are the most, because I suppose most bird watchers are there in no, not most bird watchers, that's not true, because there's a higher number of birders in the Kathmandu Valley than elsewhere in the country, and they've got a nice habit of going out and field outing every Saturday, which is a lovely idea, and they go to different parts of the valley, and some of these people are very experienced, and they've noticed that they're seeing birds they didn't see before, and looking back at records they haven't been seeing before. Birds like like the dollar bird is one, Ashiprinia, jungle babbler, all these birds. I think there must be about 20 species, are found higher up. These are birds that that are more adaptable. But there are some that most birds are not so flexible. For instance, grassland birds in Nepal now. Nepal's lowland grasslands have got a really special it's a really special ecosystem, and the birds that are just confined to those lowland grasslands. There are grasslands in the mountains, but they can't live there. They require these lowland grasslands. Things like Bengal florican, it's a famous bustard. And now these grasslands, if as climate change progresses, these grasslands are going to become, it's predicted that these grasslands are going to become too dry for these birds, and there just isn't the suitable habitat higher up. They just and so those specialist birds, will not be able to adapt to climate change. So it's lovely to see that some birds can adapt and move higher, but I think it'd be true to say that most birds would not be able to do that.
Yeah, thank you, Sarah. So we have another question. Most people think that environment and bird issues, anything related to environmental conservation, are elite issues that people cannot afford to discuss, especially in underdeveloped countries.
Yeah, but as I said, birds are they're not just there for us to enjoy, or or to worship for religious reasons. They are vitally important to the economy, because for farmers, they they eat insect pests. And actually, there is a very good illustration of that. And those of you may have heard me tell this story before. I hope you don't mind me saying it again. But this is absolutely true. That in the 1950s, Mao Zedong, everybody knows him, this very powerful man in China at that time. He thought there was a feeling that the birds were a pest, agricultural pest, and the best thing to do would be to get rid of them, and then they would get more grain, for the food for the people. So he said one of his people had this idea that, and they said that all the villagers had to go out and they had to bang pans, and they could take turns, but each family had to do it on their land, so that they kept on with this banging, banging, banging. So the birds got no rest. They were always having to fly, and eventually, after several days, they died. They weren't able to feed, they weren't able to rest, because there was this terrific noise. They had to make that much noise. And after that, there was one plague after another that affected China's crops. And today, if you go on a train through lowland China and look out the window, you virtually don't, this farmland, you virtually don't see a bird at all. So we do need the birds for economic reasons, and we also need them for pollinating our crops as well. That's another economic reason. So it's not just what you might like to think of as a luxury, something that foreigners come to see, perhaps, or it is well, actually that is another reason. When I'm sure it will get going again, tourism in Nepal. I know things are so difficult at the moment. We wonder when it will, but I'm certain it will, and we'll look back at these times and think, how did we manage to get through them? But there are, tourism is very important in Nepal, and many people, I believe 60% of widely quoted statistic at 60% of visitors, foreign tourists from Nepal visit the national parks, so they come to see the wildlife, and when they're there, they spend, money. So that is another economic reason.
Thank you, Carol. So we have another question on the chat, like sooner or later development activities will be carried out, and what can be ways of mitigating the damages due to construction and development? And I would like to add something to this, as in what do you think, what kind of things can be mitigated, and what are the losses, ecological losses that can not be recovered? Yeah.
Well, I think, as I said, environmental impact assessment needs to be made of other sites to see which environmental impact, is the least. And they'd also have to think about economic reasons, such as how far away it is from Kathmandu, and what is the practicality or difficulty of building an access road from this new site to Kathmandu. And there must be other economic reasons. So, I mean, it would certainly be less environmental impact, I think, if the site was planned to be smaller. Gosh, it's so big at the moment. And sorry, what was the rest of the other part of your question?
Yeah, there's some mitigating measures, and what?
Well, I think that's what I said, just that would be covered by the new environmental impacts assessments, which I think is very important to carry out.
Yeah, and I was asking, what are the losses that cannot be mitigated? Like looking at the examples of previous developmental works in other.
Well, I don't know whether I can look at previous. I mean, some of the losses then, they will be specialists, habitat specialists, and globally threatened species, which are probably, you know, rare. So here we're talking about things like the great Slatey woodpecker, this great big woodpecker, great hornbill, Asian woollyneck, those species that are already threatened, and just, you know, they'd find it difficult to face more, you know, more threats will make a real difference to them. And then habitat. Yes, habitat. Well, I've said that most of them would go, wouldn't I? I think the rarer species, the species that are more, the species that are, you know, only there in small numbers. For instance, in a forest, the species that are rarer, are less common, tend to be those which require very dense habitat with a good dense you know, shrubs, and also moist forests as well. Those are the specialists.
Thank you. So the other question was like, what is the status of bird conservation in Nepal? And also, could you like add something about the national endangered birds as opposed to the global bird endangered list?
Well, I've forgotten the statistics now, to be honest. I forgot. Yeah, you've got me there. Yeah, I'm just not 100% sure. You can. I'll just get it. I've got it, just to get it right. I've got it written down. Okay. Let me just. Sorry about that. I'm just getting. I got. This is the book. Can you see? This is my. This is the. This was an assessment that that together with a large team of Nepalis, including Hemsagar Barrel, and you know my husband, that we did in 2016. Now things have moved on, of course, to some extent since that time, but so species of nationally, yeah, this was what right, here we go. Yeah, this is, I just wanted to get the figures right. Sorry for this. I guess I should know them off by heart, but it's 2016 and I have it right. So we did between us, we did an assessment, apart from vagrant birds that have been recorded 10 times or less. We did an assessment between us. You know, we divided up the different groups of birds between us, and we did, and we found out, we researched as much information as we could about each bird, each species, and all the results of this, they were published 2016, are all available online for free download at the Himalayan Nature website, actually. And it comes to 6 volumes actually, like this, so it's not expecting that people would read the whole thing, but there is a summary. So then, at that time, there were 878 species recorded in Nepal, and now there's about, there are at least 12 more than that actually. But 19%, at that time, we assessed that 19% were considered as nationally threatened. I mean, that's a lot actually. And 40% of the nationally threatened birds, 168 Himalayan natures pointed out that's true, because later that year, 2016, a bird was rediscovered in Nepal called the red-faced leocicla, and it hadn't been seen in Nepal since the 19th century, and it was rediscovered. It was found again in the area of forest called Gadi Siratuli, north of Chitwan, which is pretty amazing, and a small population there. So that's an additional one. So 168 species, and 68 of them, about just over 40%, we considered were critically endangered. 38 species, that is 23%, nearly a quarter of them, we considered endangered. And over a third, that's 37%, we considered were vulnerable. And we also assessed another 62 species as being what you call near threatened. In other words, they're not threatened at the moment, but they're, we need to keep a watch on those. They're birds to watch, if you like, that they could become, threatened. But it doesn't sound very good. But I have to say, I do think Nepal has got a wonderful protected area system, and compared to many countries, Nepal has done. I don't want to sound patronizing, but I do think Nepal has done extremely well in protecting, its environment and wildlife.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Carol, and thank you for the wonderful work you have done in researching everything.
Oh, that's all right. I mean, it wasn't just me, and there was there was a team of about 8 or 9 of us actually. So did that work. So
So the other question we have is on migration of birds. Like, can you explain about the migration of birds and what specific impact does the Nijhgad Airport might have on bird migration?
I don't think it would affect. I find it hard to think to claim that it would affect bird. The actual migration of the birds. I suppose Nepal has a number of summer visitors that come from they winter. Some of them in India, and even a few in Africa actually, and they come. I guess if those birds were returning to Nepal, they find that they're moving north. They often stop off on the way, just to feed. They've been found in tropical and subtropical forests, and I guess they would just stop in, if they just stop in for a few days, they're not actually trying to stake out a territory breed. So they would just or spend any much time there. They would just stop, like call in, like us going to a cafe, in and out, and can't see that would affect them really. I can't think of a reason why it would.
So you mean that the migratory birds would be less affected than the resident?
No. I'm not saying they'd be less affected. That's different. The migratory birds.
Okay.
There are some migratory birds that. I thought you said the migration. So if they're moving through, I can't see it would affect them much. If they're just wanting to stop, they would just stop somewhere else. But birds, there'll be some birds, as I pointed out, that actually I didn't point out some were summer visitors, but I said some were residents and some were winter visitors, and obviously, and some are altitudinal migrants that move down. I should have said that also some that are, especially such as flycatchers and warblers, they're summer visitors, so they would find a loss of habitat, so it wouldn't affect them any less. But all I'm trying to say is birds that actually move through and just stop for a short time, I can't see it would affect them much. But for birds that would normally summer and so breed there, or for birds that would winter there, winter visitors, they would obviously have less habitat and they would be affected.
Yes, thank you for clearing that up. Yes, that is helpful. And the other question was on the bird ecology. Like, what is the role of birds in ecology? Like, how do they serve the other
Well,
beings?
I mean, they're a key part of the ecosystem, aren't they? You know, some of them are top predators, like birds of prey and owls, and some of the owls, and others are preyed upon. And so food for other species. There are, as I said right at the beginning, the vultures, a good example of birds that scavenge, so they clear up, eat waste, dead birds, dead bodies. So birds have multiple roles in the ecosystem. Oh, and dispersers as well, pollinators and dispersers. Pollinators of flowers and dispersers of seed. That's another very important ecological role, isn't it?
Yes, yeah. Thank you so much, Carol. I know that you're about to, like, your time is about to end. So, would you like to give a short final note to everyone?
Yes, well, I would just like to thank I'd like to thank you, Salonika, and the other members of Rethink Nijhgad, including Sanjay Adhikari, for inviting me, giving me the opportunity to talk about Nijhgad, because I feel strongly about it. You know, I've ever since I heard about it, I felt strongly about it. And I'd like to thank everyone for listening, of course. And I just, you know, my heartfelt wish is that that the government does indeed rethink Nijhgad and looks at, is it needed? Does it need to be so big? Is there another alternative that will have a smaller environmental impact? I sincerely hope to see that happen. Anyway, I'll be looking, I'll be listening. Thanks again.
Thank you so much, Carol, for your time and for all the work that you've done in Nepal. It's
Oh,
really,
don't thank me for that. I hasn't felt, you know, Nepal's been very important to me. And just final word, I wish to, you know, I'm very impressed by the Rethink Nijhgad team, and I want to wish you all the best in what you're trying to achieve. Okay?
thank you so much.
Okay,
So,
bye-bye now.
bye. Sorry.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye. And if anyone else has any questions that they would like to get answered, could you please send us to our email and we could forward it to Carol if possible. So here's our email. It's on the chat. So, yeah. Thank you, Carol. Thank you.